It's on your monitor.
Oh, it's on the monitor. Okay, right there. It's just coming up, yes. So, I want to start with this little video clip that we played. I don't know whether the people on the dais and the community actually understood what was being said. Did everybody understand what was going on in that little video clip? Well, the guy who said is sitting right here. So let me start with Jomi here. Do you have a microphone, Jomi? Jomi is from Philadelphia. He's an active member of the Syro Malabar Catholic community there. He is actually related to me. He's actually my cousin, actually my wife's cousin. You know, I carried him when he was a baby. I can't do that anymore. Big guy now. But he's a very thoughtful guy and has some insights about how young adults feel and think in our church. We randomly interviewed him, and I kind of liked his interview, so I asked him to be on the panel. So can you tell us what you were just saying in that video?
Hi, everybody. I'm Jomi. Thanks for the introduction. I think the prompt of that speech was essentially, what are the issues that you see in the community, or what is one thing that you think is causing youth to maybe not identify as much? And a quick summary of what that video was about was how, you know, there's a lot of, you know, accomplished youth, and there's a lot of accomplished elders in our church, but it never seemed to be that it mattered on what you knew or what you could do. It's if you were an older person, you were automatically correct, and younger people who felt like they could contribute to something or they had ideas to offer were just cast aside because an older person was just at the table.
So in what context are you experiencing this? Are you talking about meetings or just coming to church?
No, more specifically in how things are done at church or ideas on what we want to do at church. It's the amount of times we've run into, that's not how it's been done, this is how we're going to do it, we know how to do it. And once, as a youth, once you hear that multiple times, you just come to the, I don't want to offer my opinion, I don't want to get shot down, I also just don't want to hear this.
As we talk, see if you can think of a very specific example where that plays out, okay?
Yeah.
So, others on the panel, what do you think, Uncle or Chetan, about the adult's perspective? Do you feel like we are, as older people in the church, ignoring the young adults?
So it's a perspective. You know, I grew up in India for almost half of my life, and my other half I've spent over here. So you grow up with a certain set of norms, Syro Malabar norms, Malayali norms, and you come into this country. So you can either adapt or you can reject. So when you come here, you're searching. What's the right approach that you need to take? Should you adapt or reject, or how you should go? So I chose to adapt, which means like there are a lot of values, a lot of culture in this country that are great. And
but Paul Jatan, I think the issue here is not just your perspective in your church. Do you think the quote-unquote allegation he makes would be true? Like if he were to, somebody his age would come in one of the church meeting or some function and raises his hands and says, okay, I got an opinion about this. Okay. And say something. Is there a mentality among people who would say, he's a kid. I know he's a bank manager now, 30 years old, but I know him, he was a baby, he just grew up, we got better ideas.
Right. So I was getting to that.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. So, idine chala change agents venam. I'm sorry, I spoke in Malayalam. You need change agents who can influence these things to make changes in your community. If you are a change agent and if you find multiple change agents, you will see how the community evolves.
But is that real? Is that you? So
it
you're agreeing?
Yes. I can say that from my involvement in this convention, how we have changed this, being a change agent. So, we often face situations like this in church, but then it takes a change agent to to make that change, is what I was trying to get at. So once I adapt, I have to be that change agent to make the change in the community. So you know that guys like him have a voice in the church to get what he wants out of our church. That was what I was saying.
Do you have a
Yeah.
specific example in your mind?
So I do have somewhat of an example in terms of sort of what Paul Chaden was saying about the ability to adapt and to listen to the youth. So my husband and I, and a few handful of people in the church, are in an interesting situation. Our parents immigrated from India, from Kerala, to North America, and we are the first generation children that have grown up in the Malayalam church, and now we have children ourselves. My husband and I, we married. We were lucky to meet each other. We married Syro Malabar, both of us, and now we have children. So we are this generation coming up, but we are still considered youth. We are not considered adults.
And you are a
And-
pediatrician, right?
I'm a physical medicine rehabilitation
Oh,
physiatrist.
your husband is an
Emergency doctor.
Okay. How
So-
long have you been working?
10 years.
10
so
years.
I'm not young. I'm as old as the other adults with young children. But so we have to adapt. Both sides have to adapt. And language is a little bit of an adaptation. So just what you were speaking in English, then you put in a little bit of Malayalam, and you went to English. What needs to happen, I feel, and what happens in the church, it's sort of an all or none phenomenon. Either you just speak Malayalam, or you just speak English. But at home, we speak both. So why can't we adapt and put both? Use a phrase in Malayalam and immediately put that same phrase in English. There is the ability to understand. So an example of this, I'll tell you the example. My husband and I went to a retreat at the Malayalam church. And
Did you mean Syro Malabar Church?
Syro Malabar Church. We went to it was a mandatory retreat. So we were there sitting in the audience. It was a very interesting talk. And they were talking about raising children and family. But the talk was given entirely in Malayalam. At one point, the speaker asked the audience, "Does everybody here speak English?" And everybody raised their hand. Does anybody here not understand Malayalam? And me and my husband raised our hand, and he said, "Okay, how much do you understand?" We said, about 60%, which I would say maybe a lot of people's children are at that, this first generation. We understand, but it's not 100%. And it's not enough that if it's in fully Malayalam that we can participate. So knowing that everybody in the audience spoke English, because most of that audience had young children and they're working, they have to speak English at work, the speaker continued to speak the entire presentation in Malayalam. And they were talking about the struggles of raising the children in North America, and I really felt that I could have contributed to that because I am a child born and raised in North America, and I feel I could have contributed if I was included, if there was the ability to adapt and change and not just stick to the one way of doing it. Actually, the comment was, "You will get enough just by sitting there." But no, it's not enough just to sit there and absorb it. Both parties have to be able to adapt.
Let me interject there. So Bishop Tarail has joined us. Bishop, we are just talking about a little bit of the cultural, social situation where many young people feel they are connected with the Syro Malabar Church spiritually, but socially they're not connected. We're kind of trying to see where is this disconnect. And one of the areas that came out from Jomi's sharing is the fact that in spite of them being like in their 30s or even early 40s, with kids, they are still considered as quote-unquote youth. Okay, and so they don't feel like they have a voice in the church at anything. And did you think about a specific example, Jomi?
I did. So this past year, I can only pull from my own experience, but this past year, the youth led the Tirunal in the Philadelphia parish. And one thing that we really felt passionate about was that we wanted to give back to the community. for the past couple of years, it's been fun. It was always a great time for the community, but we never felt like we, as a whole group, were able to give back. So at one of the retreats that we had previously went to, we had partnered with a nonprofit called Rise Against Hunger, and we wanted to bring that experience to our church. When we initially suggested the idea, we thought all the youth were blown away. Everyone was like, this is something
so you proposed the idea to the youth of the church?
Yeah. So
how did you do that? Like a Snapchat or some kind of an electronic system? Or
so it initially started with the presidentes of the Tirnal itself.
Okay.
And then we spread it out amongst like the different youth group me's and WhatsApps, and everyone's like, this is something that we can really get behind. And
the
most
youth
of the
were
time,
excited about it.
Youth were excited, and you know that they're excited because the youth that you only see on Christmas and Easter were the ones that are saying, hey, like, I don't have the time to come for this, but, I can donate. And I may actually be able to bring my family for this. We had youth that moved away that came back. And what we initially ran into was a lot of buy-in from the youth, and then whispers and comments from like adults. Oh, like, why does it have to be like this? Like, we have a cultural show planned. Like, why do they have to do the service event now? Why can't they do it later? This is our Tirnal. And it made us feel like we as a group had done something, and when we wanted to do it, and like in the name of God, in the name of our church, it was met with, that's not how it was done. We already have a cultural show. Why don't you do it later? And it took a lot of buy-in, and we had really good support system from parents and Achin, and like we established that, hey, like this is an amazing opportunity to do something. And then we ended up raising a lot of money, a lot of youth that don't come to church. And I can honestly tell you, they're not going to step foot in church.
I want to move on from this special topic.
Manojita, one thing.
Yeah.
I'm really compelled to ask this question.
Yeah.
This is by design. Meanwhile, please, slido.com. Jomi, can you stand up?
Oh, it's
He wants to
interactive.
point to the shorts.
Yes. Look at that. Judgment. And I wonder how many people in this hall is judging you right now for wearing shorts and sitting in that panel. And
Is that a Slido question that's going to come up?
not yet. I probably should, right? I
Maybe.
probably should. But look at that. It's judgment. Right? That is one of the biggest reasons why people are struggling to connect with the church.
So let's talk about judgment. So one of the things I will probably ask you down the road is, let's identify these areas where there is a disconnect between one generation and the other. Now, I know a lot of new people have come in, and so I just wanted to reintroduce the session one more time. We are discussing here why our young people, when I say young people, anyone who is born here or identify themselves more with the American culture, would feel connected with the Syro Malabar Church in a spiritual way. They're happy to come to church for a prayer. If you ask them, do you believe in the Catholic Church? Yes. Do you want to come for Kurbana? Yes. Now, do you want to come to our social situations? Do you feel connected with our social situations? No, absolutely not. And we are trying to identify what is driving that. And one of the things that we just identified is, for whatever reason, we parents, the older generation, considers all the American-born children, quote-unquote children, however old they are, even if they are in their 40s, having their own kids, we still consider them kids. And they feel it, like they don't have an opportunity to say something. Now, going along with those lines is the idea of judgment. So, what is this judgment that people are talking about? Judy?
So I think Anish pointed to one of the things I also have issue with is dress. So I dress in traditional outfits. Today at the parade, I put a sari on. So I wore the sari, now I'm wearing a dress. I should feel comfortable to go to church as long as it's appropriately dressed, if I'm in a dress or even pants and a shirt. But I don't feel comfortable. I feel that there is a judgment, and I know I've talked to some other young people as well, and we feel that if we don't wear a salvar or a sari, then it's judged, it's frowned upon. And I don't think that's a really good attitude for going to church. We should be respectful and dress well And if we choose to dress in traditional Indian, we choose to do that. Or if we choose to dress American, we choose to do that as well. But it shouldn't be, again, an all or none.
Is this the female phenomenon, Jomi, or is it true for the boys' side also, or the men's side also?
Thankfully, dress shirt and pants is universal, so.
How about the shorts?
I know not to wear shorts. My mom would kill me. But
Even if you were to go to Latin church,
I have worn shorts to Latin church.
would your mom be okay with that?
I go when she doesn't know.
Let's say
But
she
no,
knew.
I
Let's
don't,
say she
I don't
knew.
think she would.
So there is a different approach to you going to Syro Malabar Church as opposed to Latin church.
But it's not just his mother, it's the congregation. So if you go to a Latin church, the congregation does not judge you. It's not just your parents that are controlling that. But the feeling is that at Syro Malabar Church, the congregation is judging you if you're not dressed. And I feel there should be some flexibility with that.
Again, we're talking about feelings. Truth and reality might be different. It's about how a whole generation feels. And I really don't want to go too much into dissecting what is right and wrong, but understanding the problem is half the solution. And then we can bridge the gap. I think Justice wanted to make a comment.
Yeah, but I could, I'm sorry. What I could actually learn is, there's a little bit of a conflict between an Americanized Syro Malabar or a Syro Malabarized American. Your parents have orthodox thoughts about their something called modesty, what we call adakka odukam. Adakka odukam means adakkandathu adakkalum, odukkandathu odukkaluമാണ്. This is what your parents always speak about at home. I don't know whether you followed my Malayalam on this. See, they don't just believe in the non-honest parts being shown, at least when you come to church. They even quote St. Paul and say the way that you have to come to church, how modest women should be. You should cover your head also. Not because your hair falls on the floor, but it is actually a mark of respect. So, you spoke about this Latin church. They had a different cultural approach altogether. If ever you happen to come to Ernakulam and there is a church, even among the Latins, there is two versions. The other version is that Unnimishya Padli, that is close to, that is Anglo-Indians, where you don't find even shorts. It is shorter than the shorts. But nobody bothers whether it is male or female, because this is their culture. So there is always a quest in man's mind working, that the culture that one has followed should be continued wherever you are. This is their cultural quest from the part of the parents. And they have found meaning and they have found relevance in following this cultural quest. But now that you are in America, in Malayalam we have a saying, Chera thinnunna nattu thannal cherayude nadukashna thinnum. If you go to a place where you eat snake, better eat the middle part of the snake. Don't be fussy about the tail or head. So, as far as you are concerned, you have an inner conflict that my parents don't understand our new generation concepts, whereas the parents have a feeling that we have followed a particular way of life culturally and it has helped us. And they are worried that in case you deviate, that deviation might endanger you. This is the conflict, and there should be a middle path according to me. What this middle path, if you can have something to suggest, I can definitely suggest, but I would like to have this middle path after Bishop Pamplani or Bishop Tarail would speak something about the middle path, because they are seen inside and outside.
So I agree. The dress should be modest. Yes, there's no question about that. I think the issue is more does it have to be a salwar? Does it have to be a sari? Which can sometimes be more revealing than a pant and a shirt. But I'm just saying...
You need, for your information, even with the sari, you can be the most immodest woman
Yes, that's
if you don't wear
exactly,
it properly.
exactly. That's right.
So it's not a question as to how much part you cover with the sari, but the way in which you dress it modestly.
Exactly. So it's modest dress, but the point was that the kids should be, and young adults and even older adults should be comfortable, and women especially should feel comfortable wearing a pant and a shirt, as opposed to the expectation of always a salwar. And I've talked to a few youth, and so I'm trying to speak for the rest of the youth in that way, where, I just spoke to someone earlier and they said they were told to buy 20 salwars before they came to church because of that judgment of
I don't want it to be a discussion about modesty, but I think we are identifying one gap, which is the expectation about dress code. And even if it is not about modesty, I guess there's an expectation people should be wearing salwar and kameez or some Indian cloth when it comes to quote-unquote Malayalam church. We have to get this Malayalam church out of our head. It is the Syro Malabar church, which is beyond just the language of Malayalam. And so we got to think about how exactly do we become Indo-American, as the Major Archbishop suggested today. We have Indian roots, but we are American. And so this discussion has to happen in all our heads. We got to think, my God, my kids, what are they thinking? What is the parish community thinking when it comes to dress? And I think Paul Churton Bishop has a comment to make.
I just want to point out one thing that is missing in our discussions. I don't think that the dress in the church is all about modesty or even the culture. A major thing is about the sense of the sacred that is in every mind. You are living in a culture. I can really understand your situation because the Western civilization, the sense of the sacred is very low, But when we compare with the Indian civilization, the sense of the sacred is still high. So, whatever you wear, can you just propagate that sense of the sacred, transmit the sense of the sacred? Wonderful.
I think you nailed it right on the head, Bishop.
Yeah.
Same career. So I have a son. He's sitting in this audience. I know that. And I know where exactly he's sitting. So every time this church issue comes, what I tell him is, church should be respectful. We should respect the church. And you dress accordingly. Right? That's what I tell him. I don't care about what all the other things are. When you go to church, you respect the sacred place.
But that's where the problem is, Paul. Because sometimes how we express respect is a little different.
Right.
Like I have students come into my lecture hall and would sit with their leg up like this. They would have a whole full bottle of Coca-Cola sitting right next to them. And they would be on their laptop taking notes and very carefully attending to the lecture. Now, are they respecting me? Well, if you ask them, they would say, of course, professor, I respect you. But then when you look at their expression, how they sit in class, it'll be quite difficult, quite different. When I'm a professor of medicine in the Penn State University of Medicine. Even now, when the chief walks into the room, my gut says, stand up. If I stand up, actually it feels weird for the other guy. He comes in and would say, Abraham, why did you stand up? Did something happen? Because that is not expected. So I think a little thought about how this respect is expressed. And I think we as a community need to think about this. Why are our kids not behaving the way that we want them to behave, or dressing the way they want to dress? Even if when they think that they want to show reverence, there still could be a gap as to how they would want to express it. But if we are not cognizant of that, we're going to be after our kids all the time saying, and they're not going to respond because they're not going to see it as lack of respect, because their school, their class, nothing does the same thing. Any other comments, Bishop Pambalani?
Yes, I love the discussion that is going on here. More than the dress code that is being discussed, I think the cultural tension regarding its adaptation is the real point of departure here. And I think the culture of a country or a community had been formulated through hundreds of years. So all on a sudden you cannot demand for a paradigm shift in the culture. It takes time. And the youth who are complaining against the parents should think that you are also profiting out of the cultural mentality of your parents. How many American parents would take care of their children after some 20, 25 years? How many of them will be paying their university fees? That means there are several elements which the so-called American Syro Malabar children are profiting out of the Indian culture. So the problem arises when we are making our own normative principles to evaluate a particular culture. The Western culture is different, the Eastern culture is different. And we must be patient enough to show respect to each other. The Indian culture is something very significant, and there are very positive elements. Very tight family bonds are there. As Bishop had pointed out, there is real sense of sacred within it. And within the Western culture also, there is respect for individual freedom. Individual is esteemed sometimes over the society. So these differences are to be respected each other. Then only we will be able to make this adaptation in a meaningful way. That is what I think.
Let's not, I want to go to the next topic if you want to make a quick comment.
Quick comment. So I totally agree with that. I think that's a very important fact. So speaking from my point of view, I think, I am your children. For the parents here, my husband and I, we are the children that, they're going to grow up, and we are in the situation where this is what it's going to be later. I was, in Canada, I grew up in Canada. There was not a Syro Malabar church at that time. It was Malayalam church. Because it was Syro Malankara, Syro Malabar. We were all together. And only later, and even here as well, it's a more recent development that it became just Syro Malabar. So I grew up in that setting, and then I left. Like many of my friends, we left. We went to the Latin church, Roman Catholic church. And, my husband and I got married. We had children. And we were members of the other church. But the reason why we came back to Syro Malabar Church is for our children. When we had children, we realized the traditions, the culture, the importance of that. That, it is for my children that I am part of the Syro Malabar Church. It's actually not for me. It's not for me because socially, I do not fit in. I don't fit into this church. Just like Anish was saying, I don't get the messages from everybody. Yesterday, there was a program and my daughter was crying because she saw her friends on stage, but I didn't get the message. I'm here for my children, but for some reason, I'm not considered part of the church enough to get the message to put my children in the programs, which is why I'm part of the, I want my children to be part of the traditions, not to lose the culture, to do that. So there needs to be some way that we can keep this generation in the church, or I will tell you, it's going to be lost because there's only a handful of people like me.
That's exactly why we are here. We don't want that to happen, right?
So,
we want to make that change happen. It's beginning now.
Yes. Your children, I am your children. So if you want your children to come back to the church or to stay in the church, we left the church. We left. We came back for our children.
Can I ask you a
But we want them to stay, not to even leave.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
In one line, can you tell me what kept the connection with the Syro Malabar Church for you?
Our parents.
Okay, so we still have a role to play, even when your kids are not coming to church. Be in touch, please.
Yeah, so
in a Syro Malabar way.
What Achin was saying about parents, these are the best parents. that any child can have. And it's our parents that kept that strong. So I would urge all parents to keep the traditions, There will be, there will be resistance. But to keep it going strong, but also to put in flexibility. Because with life, there's evolution, right? If you're not able to adapt, if creatures, animals, whatever it is, if they can't adapt, they will not survive. And we are going into a new terrain here. So we have to look at the mistakes or the paths of what has happened in this generation to realize where to go in the future. And that's why I'm happy I'm part of this panel, because I feel that, this is what is going to happen in the next round if things don't change. And a lot of things are changing. Don't get me wrong. There are the fact that I'm here today, somebody asked me to come and speak here today, there is a lot of change happening. The fact that so many people are here listening to this is a good sign. But there is a problem, there's a gap, and there needs to be change made for survival.
Before we go into these questions up here, I want to, can you show hands if you are identified as American more than Indian? Children brought up here, so not many. I guess we have a majority parents group in this audience. I was expecting more young adults in this group. Yeah, I see some of you are there. I saw you. And so we asked a question here. Which of the gaps are important, relevant to you, to select the top 3? And the top 3 gaps are there. So it took some brainstorming to identify what exactly is this gap, that we are talking about. Language, very easy to understand. They speak English, we speak Malayalam. There is a gap. We know how to bridge it. But the rest of the gaps were a little bit more difficult to identify. And here are the top 3 things where our expectations are different. If you look back, it'll be easier, bishops, and the panel can see it. But yeah, if you can see it, that's fine. If you can't, if you look back. The expectation for girls, women, different from being boys and men. Let's talk a little bit about that. Is that really, and let's make our answers a little shorter so we can go around a little bit more. Is there a difference in expectation between girls and boys?
I think so. I'm just growing up with friendships with guys and girls. One of the easier things to identify is if you're hosting an event or you're going to a party or anything, guys are allowed to basically just tell their parents, hey, I'm doing this, and that's fine. And then girls are like, oh, who are you going with? Why are you going with them? How are you getting home? And I understand it's a concept of safety, but it seems like girls are always under a lot more scrutiny, not just for the safety purpose of it, but also who may see you there? Are you going to bring shame to us? Because that's my take on it. It always seemed as if there was a lot more obstacles for girls to experience the same, friendship.
But now
and
both
fun.
of you, Judy and Jomi, both of you are past your teen years. And I think you're able to think sensibly. And I'm sure you understand where your parents' mind were when they put those kind of restrictions. Right? Or no? Oh, hold on. You right? You think you understand where your parents' mind was?
I understand that parents have the best intentions.
So with that in mind, do you think what they did was right or wrong? And if not?
I think there's a better way of doing it. I think if a parent is nonstop, just gives no trust to their child and gives them just concrete rules, this is it, these are my rules, and I know best, they're not at all allowing the child to make their own decisions. And it really hurts them when they leave high school, outside of the bubble of influence of their parents, and they go to college and they grow up where they don't have their parents just over their shoulder telling them, be home by 11, don't do this, don't do that. If you don't enable your child to develop and make those good decisions when they're younger, it's going to be just an explosion of options and choices, so many new things that they were never exposed to. And if you're someone who's never exposed to something and you see something new, the temptation to try it and to try and figure that out is so high. That's where I think you see a lot of youth kind of be repressed in their high school and formative years, go to college and really get into the bad.
I wonder if parents would actually be thinking that. Like, for example, your daughter comes home and says, I want to go for something after 8 p.m. I want to go watch a movie with my friends. I wonder if parents are thinking, you know what, by letting them make that decision, I'm actually preparing them for making some decisions in future. We are so short-sighted, we are thinking about just what happens for that movie. I wonder whether we are actually thinking about how we are helping our kids get to a point where they can actually make their own decisions and be confident at that. I want all the parents to think about it. Are we actually thinking like that when we interact with our children? What do you think, Pauletta, when you were raising up your kids, did you actually think like that? Okay, I'm going to say yes or no, but beyond the yes and no, I know by saying yes or no, I am helping them to make a decision, learn to make a decision. Have you thought about it that way?
So one thing I have told him is always be honest with me.
How do you make that happen?
Well, I trust him for what he says. And I'm sure he knows that he shouldn't break my trust. So if he says, Dad, I'm going out, I'll be back at such and such a time, plus or minus 30 minutes, that's okay.
Do you have boys or girls?
I only have a boy, so I don't have a reference with the girl. That's all I can. So I was going to ask the second question, but that's fine. My reference is only a boy, so that's all I know. I don't have a reference girl. So
yeah, why don't you say your perspective, Judy?
Well, I have a boy and a girl, but they're very young, so I'm not really in the teenage years and all that. But the question initially was expectations for girls and women different from boys to men. I did have something to comment on that. As a woman, the only woman here on the panel. So
that's because you need only one female to balance 5 of us.
Right. So that that actually is getting to what I'm saying, leadership. What are our children seeing? What are the youth seeing when they're looking at the committees? How many women are in the committees? And how many men are in the committees? How many of their mothers are doing, what are the fathers doing, what are the mothers doing? I think that there needs to be more women in leadership positions in the church. I think there's a tendency for the men, for the fathers, to be sort of running things, but women have, equal, if, 50% is women, 50% is men. So 50% should be women. The other thing, expectations for girls, women, is we got to that, we touched on it, the dress. The girls are expected to wear the traditional Indian outfits, whereas the boys, there's not that same expectation. So again, I'm not the only female that feels it, that, when we don't wear the traditional Indian outfit, we feel that judgment. And even last point as well with the dress, it was touched upon, covering the head. Now, why is it just the women have to cover their head? Shouldn't the men have to cover their head too? No? You see what I'm saying, right? So I know, the Achins and stuff, you have the hat, but in general in the congregation, and I know it's very pious to cover the head, but that's humility. That's for everybody. I'm just speaking. I'm not trying to make any enemies or conflict or anything like that.
I think you made some enemies already.
Sorry, sisters. But just in terms of the question, I'm just touching on it, that, there is a different expectation for women and girls than men.
That actually points to a little gap about covering head. What the idea of covering head is among the new generation. I want Bishop Pamplani to say something.
Yes, this is a biblical question, so I should answer to that. Not actually answering, I shall explain the context in which Paul is giving such a mandate. St. Paul says the women should cover the head. He is writing to Corinthians. And you know that this is not a message that is meant for every woman all over the world. That is not the issue. Paul is writing to the questions that had been raised to him one after the other. I think this time I had been teaching St. Corinthians in one of the seminaries. I had noticed 14 questions raised to Paul, and this is the 13th question. And this question, a particular group of women were making all kinds of calumny against Paul, asking that he is not an apostle, he is not actually selected by Jesus, he has not even seen Jesus. How can he be called an apostle? Such are the questions raised by these women. In order to refute their argumentation that Paul is saying, oh women, you keep silence in the church, don't speak within the church. Remember that it was the female who had been seduced first. So you have to cover your head. So don't understand that statement of St. Paul as a universal commandment meant for every woman. That is not the meaning of the Pauline epistle. I hope you understood. So, but there is a traditional way, the way of covering the head. You know the Jewish people, when the religious people, both the men and the women were covering the head. So there is no question, there is no meaning for Paul in asserting that women should cover their head. Both of them were covering their head while they were praying. That was the usually existing system. So Paul is not at all making any misogynist statement or anti-women statement there. Rather, he is retorting to a single particular group of people, maybe consisting of some 15 members. That is the only point there. But covering the head is realizing the sense of sacredness. That is why our sisters are covering. The bishops are also covering their head with a cap. So that is also a sign of respect, that's all.
I think one of the comments that came up here says that we are missing the point in our discussion and the dress code, because it is about the judgment. And I think, let's not miss that. I want everybody to take that. People feel judged when we make comments about their dress and so on. And so let's switch gears and talk a little bit more about the female issue here. One of the questions or the comments that came up was expectations about marriage. Is there a difference in the expectations about marriage among people who came from India and people born and brought up here? I think the specific issue I've heard discussed is the age. Let's start with age.
I grew up in North America, and in pretty typical fashion, my parents pretty much said, concentrate on school. School. Then all of a sudden, I finished school and was like, get married. So I don't think it's very much different here than it is in India, where there is still that emphasis on school. And my parents were very good in saying why school was important. And it was that, they wanted us to get married, but they wanted us to be independent too. They wanted us to make sure that I have a brother and a sister, that, me and my sister, that even if we got married, they always told us, always work, because you have to be independent, you have to be self-sufficient. So I think in general, in India and here, education is on the forefront, and that's emphasized. But then marriage is also emphasized. I don't know if there's a particular age. I think everyone always thinks of that 30 mark, that scary 30 mark. I guess you're not there yet. That's my experience with it, that, focus on school, but before you turn 30, get married.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just think that we actually just had a talk about finding the one. And I think there's a gap in between the perception of dating and finding the one or your perfect one for American people that identify as like American Indians compared to people that came over from India. And I think the biggest thing on that is, for us, dating is a journey. You're finding the perfect person that you want to be the mother of your children, the one that you want to be a parent with, the one that you feel like you can make the best team with.
I don't want to talk too much on that one issue.
No,
we're going to discuss that in the next session.
No, I get that.
The pressure.
What I'm saying is, we feel the pressure because it seems as if it's just a checkbox.
What do you mean by that?
you did high school, now go to college. You did college, now either go to some kind of, graduate school or go to a job. Now that you've gotten to that stage, when you graduate, your next checkbox is marriage. They don't stop asking you about it until you hit that checkbox. Once you get married, it's, where's kid number 1? That's great, now where's kid number 2? So it's never ending, and it's always just the pressure to, hey, like, this is what we envision, and we're, as a society, just going to keep asking you for this.
Does the parents here identify with that? I think that's how I would think. That's how my parents thought. Well, you finished your school now. Yeah, the next thing to do is to get married.
It is.
But the kids don't think that way. Is that what you're saying?
It's not that we don't think that way. We don't need to, every single time we talk to a relative or some random auntie or uncle in church, say, hey, when are you getting married? Your brother just got engaged, right? You're next, right? Do you have anyone? No, you asked me that 5 minutes ago, a week ago. It's not changing. And just nonstop, just having someone just throw this in your face, you just don't want.
Yeah. If I would suggest to take one thing out of this discussion here home, please do not ask your kids, are you married? Because I have heard it so many times from young adults who are not coming to church, especially females, who says, as soon as they come to church, the first auntie who would say, Kalyanam to aile. Again, because I think our mentality is, yep, Padatham karinju, the next box to check is Kalyanam, not actually cognizant of the way the young people here are thinking about marriage. Well, they have a long process to do, and they don't think of it as another checkbox because they have to find their partner, find the right person. And I think there's some gap in that thinking in our head, that we unknowingly hurt and irritate a lot of people who don't want to come to church because there's the big pressure. Am I right?
That is true. And I think one fact that I didn't talk about is, I think parents are very proud of their kids for what they're accomplishing in school, but they don't understand that once you graduate, and we work really hard to get wherever we are in our careers. And we want to be able to work hard, and we want to be able to build ourselves up. And just constantly needing to worry about getting married, to me at least, is a detriment to me always like working hard, because that's what I'm focusing on. Oh, like I have to now worry about a family. Like that's the only thing that can be on my mind, rather than I'm going to be the best version of myself. It seems like there's not a lot of opportunity in the timeline for parents to become the best version of yourselves, because we're not the best version of ourselves when we get out of college. It takes time, and it seems that
I'm so happy to learn that.
Korachu, I feel it's social conversation. It may not be that they really mean it. I think it's just to have a dialogue with him or her. Hey, I feel that way.
The parents are asking about marriage.
Yes, it's just a social conversation. They may not really mean it.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. We should be sensitive about.
Yes.
That is very natural for in India.
Right. Yes.
It's a natural question, and people are not going to feel uncomfortable with
Right. It's just a social conversation.
I have a comment. Again, just from my experience growing up, and it was almost touched on as well. Is a phenomenon that happened where I grew up is that a lot of people didn't marry other Malayali people. They married outside of the church or outside of the culture. And I think part of the problem was that, there are a lot of youth, but when you talk to the youth, when you were younger, there is judgment. You see people looking at you and then they're like, assuming that you're going out or something like that. I would encourage the parents to let your children talk to the other children. Whether, girls talking to boys talking, they don't have to be dating, and not to assume that they're dating, but let them talk. Because what may happen later on is the phenomena that I observed is that, they'll get older and they may not talk to those people again, the people that you now want them to talk to. So don't just wait for that checkbox, like you're saying. It should be happening. In this culture, there's social media, there's a lot of social events. The reality is that people date in North America. And even when, I married a Malayali Syro Malabar, But let them talk to a few people, because the one person you may meet may not be the right person. So that, I would encourage the flexibility of having the youth being able to mingle without judgment. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, or if the point is getting across, but there needs to be some more acceptance for the young kids to talk to each other and to meet each other, because that's the only way that in the end they may end up hopefully getting married within the community as opposed to outside of the community. And another problem that I noticed going back to the Syro Malabar Church is when people get married outside of the church, they may not continue in the church or rejoin the church because they may feel that their spouse is not accepted because they're a different color, different race, different religion. So that is, again, something maybe to learn from the generation that has just passed, where if you restrict things so much that you may lose an opportunity that may have been there earlier.
Have your parents introduced a Syro Malabar version of dating in America? Have the parents introduced a Syro Malabar version, edition of dating in America? Well, I just want to conclude one second. Even if you have anything here also, please don't have these American children getting married with the dress code you have in Kerala. That might create a lot of problem there. I saw a priest refusing to ceremonize the marriage. He said, better you go and dress with your mandragodi and come back, I will bless the marriage. Not with this dress, because this is an American dress which is good for America, but not for a church in Kerala.
See, Judy, so my thought on what you said is, some of the things are generational changes, right? When you talk about cultures, you say cultures evolve. There's no step change, right? So it takes a generation sometimes to manifest changes. And that's what will happen. Some of these small things, parents have to just adapt and let go, right? But there are other changes that will evolve. And when you get to a certain age, and when your generation gets to that age, it'll be a very different Syro Malabar. I'm positive, I'm sure about that. I know when my son gets to your age and all that, I mean, even though we keep fighting about it, I'm pretty sure that's why I'm fighting hard for those kind of kids to come in and change this church. And I think it will happen eventually. So my thought was evolution versus step change. It will happen. It's just a matter of time. And parents, you better be prepared for that, because that is going to happen.
Okay, we have just a very few more minutes here to conclude. There's a big question up on the screen there, which I'm actually not going to discuss, because I'm not sure it's actually a socio-cultural gap, whether women have to ask permission from their husbands. And that goes into how the dynamics of marriage works. What is the next question? In today's society, Indian parents expect their children to marry someone who is Indian. Shouldn't parents prefer religion as a main priority instead of race? I guess the idea is, maybe we can conclude with this little discussion. We only have about 4 minutes. And marriage will be discussed in the next session. We're going to have a panel like this, actually, people who are married, people who are dating, people who have gone through an annulment. We're all going to sit together and talk about this process of marriage. So the issue here is it okay to consider marrying an American person who is Catholic? Or is it better to marry an Indian who is not necessarily Christian? And I think I'm going to conclude with that. Maybe one of the bishops, maybe Bishop Bamplani, can talk about that in choosing a spouse. I know it's a spontaneous question. We want honest answers, what you think.
Catholic, Christian, Indian.
Yes, I thank God I will never be asked to make such a choice in my life. Yes. First of all, I will give a priority to faith. If you believe in Christ Jesus, and if you believe in one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, if there is such a spouse, partner that you can ever find out, I will recommend that reality over the nationalist or any racist differentiation.
So what you're saying is, if I am looking for a spouse and here's a guy, let's say I'm a girl, here's a guy who is American and Catholic, interested in faith. Here's a person who is very nice, Malayali, but not Catholic. I have equal choice if I like both people. You're saying you would suggest the American who is Catholic.
Yes, I would. I am not worried about the nationality. I am worried about the faith.
Amen.
Can I say something? Sorry, I say too many things. They should not have invited me. So, yes, I think faith is the most important thing. And the beauty of a Syro Malabar church is this, that we share faith and we share culture. That is the beauty of this church. Because you can go to any other churches and you share the same faith, but you don't share the culture, you don't share the traditions. And in the end, no matter what the differences are, intergenerational, first generation, second generation, age, male, female, in the end, if we can realize that this is the strongest part of attending, being part of this community, is that we have both. Because that's what defines us. It's not, we're defined by where we come from, we're Indian, but we're also defined by our religion. That's the two things that define us. So just wanted to say that. Yeah.
So I want to bring this session to a conclusion. Thank you all for coming. Don't ever think that the Syro Malabar Church is not interested in this generational gap. We are totally interested. It is true that we don't know exactly how to solve these issues. And part of the problem is because we have not identified where exactly these gaps are, and then sit down and negotiate and talk with the young adults. I'm hoping that this can become a discussion in all our parishes, in your ward prayers and meetings and so on. The material that we have discussed and you're seeing during this convention is going to be available to you. So make sure that this becomes a discussion. Let's have a great discussion in the church. And as Pope Francis said, let's listen to each other. There's a slide that you would see in one of these meetings which says, it is not just the young children and kids in our church. There are some older people also, people who are retiring and so on. And it's almost as if they don't have a voice anymore. If you come to your churches, it is not the young adults only who are missing from our church. A lot of retired people whose kids are no longer going to catechism have actually stopped coming to Syro Malabar Church because, quote unquote, the liturgy is too long. And they would rather much go to the local Latin parish and have gone and escaped that way. We're not paying attention to that either. So as a church, let us have a great dialogue and let's get rid of this gap so it really becomes an Indo-American church, which is Oriental in faith, or Syro Malabar in worship, Indian in origin, and American, Indo-American in culture. Thank you, bishops, for coming. If you don't want to make another statement to conclude? No. Okay. I think we're good. Thank you. I hope it was a useful discussion.
Thank you very much, Manojita. Thank you very much, bishops, and the distinguished panel. Just leaving one thought. By now, everybody probably knows that it was a moderated session. Not every question that you posted didn't get posted. And the reason is to keep everything respectful. But interesting thing, as the moderator, what I felt was judgment was everywhere. There's a good part of this group that listened and was open and engaged, and there was a good part that was very judging.
Can you say which specific area you felt the judgment?
The judgment was about many things, about the cultural aspect of it. One of the biggest questions that came up was, the whole point of this is to have the Malayali culture. So why can't you adjust to what the priest said, what the church say? And not even open to listen to what is being discussed.
Yeah, I don't think we have time to discuss that. We will keep that discussion for another time because we have to go to the next session. Okay, so come to the marriage session. We will see you there.